Hey everybody, today we're going to be going through how pivot charts work and pivot tables and what their uses are and why you should know how to do them in Excel. So to start out, I wanted to kind of explain what my data was. I've got a big list that has a food name that was sold, the cost of it, the type of food that it was, the location that it was sold at, and the shift that it was sold on. And if you go over to my pivot chart, you can see that we can use them to kind of get a visualization on a lot of different types of data. So you can see here I arranged it to show what site or city sold the most of all the different items. You could also go in and you could, instead of location, you could say what food type did we sell the most of, and you can see here that it's sandwiches. And pretty much you've got endless amounts of options on what you want to do to analyze data if you're using pivot charts. So this is why you might want to use one. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to delete the pivot chart that I just showed you because I'm going to show you how to make one from scratch. Now, a couple of things that you should know before we start is a pivot chart works best if you have a large table with a lot of different items on it, with different columns that are consistent and the data is consistent, right? So here you can see it's pretty standard. I've got the food name, the cost, and everything that we went through. And you can see that I've been pretty consistent with how I labeled everything. It's all spelt the same way. You know, I didn't spell one fries with two S's and one fries with one. It's going to work best if everything is consistent. And then also, the only other thing to note before we start is your pivot chart's not going to work if one of these columns is not labeled. For example, if I forgot to write down city here, the pivot chart would not generate properly. So to get started, it's pretty straightforward. You want to select all of the data that you have in your chart that you want to work with. And to do that, the easiest way is to click the space between the one row and a column, this kind of half of a square. You can go ahead and click it. And what that does is it highlights every available cell on the sheet, which in this instance, we want to use all of the data. We don't need to exclude anything. So I'm just going to highlight everything. I'm then going to go to the Insert tab up top, click that, and then if you look over towards the middle, there's a pivot chart button that I can click right here. So I'm just going to click that. It's going to automatically pull into here what I have highlighted, so we don't need to do anything. And then when you want the pivot chart, I want it to appear in a new worksheet, right? I don't want it to put it right on top of this data. I want it kind of in its own little separate area. So I'm just going to leave that highlighted on new worksheet, which is what it defaulted to, and then I'm going to click OK. So this looks correct. This right here is kind of your pivot chart, but it doesn't have any data in it, right? It's almost like an empty bucket. And what we need to do, if you look over to the right, is we need to take these columns, or the name of the columns you can see up in field name, which is, you know, food name, cost, city, everything that I added on the titles over in the main data is shown up in this field name area. And what the pivot chart needs in order to work is we can select these with our mouse or cursor and we drag it down into one of these four different squares. You can almost think of them like buckets where you're going to take, you know, the material up here and you're going to drag it down into each one. Now, the big question then obviously is, okay, what column do I want to put into what bucket? And that's probably the most complex part about setting up pivot charts and tables, and it's probably what catches up people the most. Quick overview and just something to understand is these top two buckets don't need to be filled in order for the pivot chart to work. And the bottom two, the access and the values, they pretty much do for the most part need to be filled. So values, I'm going to say, is probably the most important bucket that there is. And what that really means is when the chart appears here and when it has the data, what do you want it to pretty much show on the y-axis, right? Like what is Excel actually counting in the data to compare the parameters against? So the easiest way to think about this is what do you want counted, and that's almost always going to be the cost if you have some sort of cost or expense or dollar amount in your data. So in this example, I'm going to hold down my mouse on costs and I'm going to drag it down until I'm in this values bucket, and then I'm just going to let go of my mouse and you can see that it put it right into here. So when you're looking at this, I would say that this is probably amongst the most useless charts you'll ever see in your entire life. Nothing is labeled. It doesn't make any sense what you're looking at. It's just the sum of the cost. And that's mainly because we don't have both of the two buckets that I said are required filled out. So before we edit anything or change the title or anything like that, we're going to get some data and put it into the axis bucket. You can think of the axis bucket as what do you actually want to look at and what do you want to assess in your pivot chart. So in this example, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say I want to look at the city on the x-axis. That's what I'm interested in. Where it says total here, I want to see what city everything was made in. So I'm going to drag it down here. Same way as the cost. Once I go over the bucket, you can go ahead and let go, and it'll automatically put it into the x-axis. And you can see here, we finally have some data to look at that's actually interesting right now. It looks like in my example that Dallas has the most sales when you're looking at the cost, right? Maybe not the most items that sold, but at least, you know, the most expensive items, and they're leading the whole group as far as sales go. But let's say that we need to present this at work and we need it to look a little bit better. And I see some problems, right? I see, you know, this isn't in dollars, you know, this doesn't have a title. I'm not really sure what this blue total means, and I'm wondering why there's a blank here at all. That doesn't make a lot of sense. Well, we can go through those things and correct them. So up first, let's switch this to dollars because we know that that's what we're working with. So I'm going to go over to the table, actually, not the chart, which is what we're looking at right here. And I'm going to highlight all of the dollar values. And when I'm on my home tab here, you can click this little dollar button or currency button and click it, and it'll automatically switch everything to the dollar value. So you can see that that is corrected. The next thing I want to switch is the chart name. You can simply click where it says total, and you can type in anything you want and click enter when you're done. So I'm going to say sales by city. Oops, and don't click enter when you're done. Maybe just click off of it when you're done. Perfect. The next thing that I want to switch is I see that there's total here, which could be useful later, but for right now, I don't really need it. So you can just click it. You can see that it highlights, and then I'm just going to click delete. The last, or maybe not even the last thing I want to do is I see that it's got a blank here, and I really don't need that displayed. It's just kind of distracting, to be honest with you. Over here, back in the table again, not the chart, you can see that there's a little drop down. I'm going to click that, and you can see that it's got every single city listed here, and including blank. So I just want to uncheck that, and then I'm going to click off of this, and you can see that blank went away. I think the last thing that I want to edit in this is I'd really like it to show it from the highest amount of sales to the lowest amount of sales, so that people don't need to look here and say, hey, is Dallas bigger than Vegas? It's kind of hard to tell. So like so many other of the edits, we're going to do it in the table, not in the chart. And you can right click any of the individual values here. I'm just going to do the top one. And then you can go to sort, and I'm going to say largest to smallest. And you can see when I did that, it adjusted the table and it also adjusted the chart. So let's just say that this is great data, right? We've taken it, we've screenshotted it, and we put it into a PowerPoint. We're really happy with it. But we want a separate one that's looking at the food type, not just the city that it was sold in. So instead of redoing this whole process again, pivot tables are really nice because you can quickly switch out what parameters you're looking at. So down below in the axis bucket or the axis square, you can see that I have city. I'm going to click on that and I'm going to drag it out. And this is almost just like a reset area. If I drop it here or here or here, it's all the same, but I've dragged it out of the bucket, and then I'm going to let go of my cursor, and you can see that it threw it back up top into the field name. And then super simple, I'm going to take field name, or food type, I'm sorry, and I'm gonna move it into the axis bucket, let go, and you can see now I've got the exact same information, but I've got it by what type of food it is, which is helpful. And of course, I'm gonna need to go through and I'll need to change the title because it's no longer city, right? I'll need to get rid of the blanks again super quick, but it's pretty easy to switch out data. So now let's talk about the other different buckets, the legend and then the filters. So the filters is pretty straightforward and about what you would expect. So I'm gonna go ahead and drop my city parameter into filters. And you can see that nothing changed when I did that really. I'm gonna throw it away and then I'm gonna throw it in. And it's completely the same stuff every time, right? But what this is allowing me to do is I can go up to the table. This appeared once I put it in the filter bucket, and I could select by what city I want, right? So I could go ahead and say, I want to see the sales of only Chicago, and then click off. And then you can see that I'm getting data only for what I've selected. So I could say food type by or for Chicago. And now I can see that Chicago has only sold desserts and sides, and desserts definitely more than the other. I'm going to get rid of the information in the filter bucket. And the last area that we want to look at for pivot charts is the legend. And you can kind of think of the legend as like a backup for the axis. This will make more sense once I show you, but right now I've got the food type on the axis. I'm going to get rid of the blank because I just find that distracting and it drives me crazy. And what I'm going to do here is I am going to just drag city into the legend bucket. And what it's done is it's taken each pillar that was on dessert, sandwich, and side, and it's taken the data and it's broken it down a step further with all these different columns. You can see right now that's maybe not the most useful because you don't know what every different column here means. But if you go into the design tab up top of your pivot chart and then click add chart element, and then we're going to go down to the bottom here and we're going to click legend, and you can select where it goes, but I'm just going to put it on the right because I think that looks best. And you can see that little area that we deleted earlier that just said total reappeared because now it's not just one column that's the total, which wasn't useful to us. It's broken it down into what city we're seeing here. So looking at the data, you can see for desserts, this orange column sells the most. So you could easily visualize right now, hey, Vegas sells the most desserts out of any other city in this example. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe and give the video a like. If you have any questions or an idea for a future video, make sure to put it in the comments below. Thanks again.